The moment the Galactic King killed the human general, 2,000 years of peace collapsed. The blade was already in her chest before I understood what I was seeing. I was standing 3 feet behind General Mara Voss when it happened. 3 feet, close enough to hear the soft sound the ceremonial blade made when it entered her, close enough to see her eyes, not with fear, not with pain, but with something closer to recognition. Like she had always known this moment was coming, like she had been waiting for it for a very long time. She did not fall immediately. She stood there for 2 full seconds looking up at Vareth the Third, Galactic King of the Kelthari Empire, Supreme Chair of the Inner Union Council, ruler of 11 star systems. He was twice her height. His 4 upper limbs were folded behind his back in the posture his species used when they felt completely unbothered. His face, that long, ridged, silver face, showed nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, nothing at all. As if he had simply corrected a minor error and was already thinking about something else. Then Mara Voss placed one hand on my arm, and her fingers tightened once, and she went down. I caught her. I do not know how. My body moved before my mind gave it permission. I was on my knees on the stone floor of the Grand Conclave Hall with her head in my lap, and around us there was total silence. 200 ambassadors, advisors, and dignitaries from 47 species stood frozen. The feast table stretched 30 meters in both directions, covered in dishes from 100 worlds. Candles burned in silver holders. The decorative banners of every union member hung from the ceiling, and the most decorated human officer in galactic history was bleeding out on the floor, and no one in that room made a single sound. My name is Callum Gray. I was 29 years old. I was the general's personal aide, which meant I carried her documents, arranged her meetings, translated her technical reports into diplomatic language, and made sure she ate something on the days she forgot. I was not a soldier. I had never fired a weapon in my life. I had a degree in interspecies communication and 2 years of experience making sure the most important human being in the galaxy stayed hydrated at formal events. And I was now the senior human official present at what was, without any question, the worst moment in 2,000 years of human history. General Voss had been speaking when it happened. She had risen from her seat at the great table, the seat third from the left, the seat humans had occupied at every conclave for 2 centuries, always third from the left, always slightly back from the primary tier, always respectful of the arrangement, and she had begun her address. Her voice was calm. It was always calm. She spoke in standard Union dialect, which she had learned before she was 10 years old, and she spoke it without an accent, which was something that still surprised even experienced diplomats. She had been speaking about the expansion proposal. The human worlds along the Meridian Arc had been growing for 60 years. 3 new colony stations were fully operational. The population numbers, the resource contributions, the Union tax compliance records, all of it pointed toward one logical conclusion, that humanity's membership tier should be reviewed, that humans should be considered for full voting status on the Inner Council. It was a reasonable argument. She presented it with data. She presented it with patience. She had gotten 4 minutes into her address when Vareth the Third stood up. Nobody stood when another delegate was speaking. It was not done. The Conclave Charter, the oldest diplomatic document in the known galaxy, was explicit on that point. Every species at that table had signed it in their own language, renewed every century. Vareth had signed it himself 40 years ago at the last conclave. Everyone in the room knew the rule. He stood anyway. Mara paused. She looked at him. She did not step back. He crossed the space between his seat and hers in 4 long strides. His attendants did not move to stop him. His guards, stationed at the far wall, stood perfectly still. Whatever he was about to do, it had been planned. It had been decided before she ever opened her mouth. He pulled the blade from the decorative sheath at his side, a ceremonial weapon, inlaid with the symbols of the Conclave Treaty, traditionally worn as a symbol of commitment to peace, and he drove it through her chest. Then he looked around the room, and he said, in perfect standard dialect, with no more emotion than a man commenting on the weather, "Pets do not speak at the table." And he sat back down. I held her. I did not look at him. I did not look at the ambassadors. I looked at her face, which was still and quiet, and I listened to the small sounds she made as she tried to breathe and found that she could not. She was looking at the ceiling, at the banners hanging there, and I believe she could still hear. Because in the last 10 seconds she turned her eyes to me, not to the room, not to the king, to me. Her lips moved once. I read them rather than heard them. 2 words. She said them twice, slowly, clearly, as though she needed me to be absolutely certain. "The protocols." Then her fingers loosened on my arm, and she was gone. The silence in the hall lasted another full minute. I know because I counted. I sat on that stone floor and I counted every second, holding her, and nobody in that room moved or spoke. 47 species, 200 individuals, witnesses to an act that had just ended 2,000 years of civilized history, and not one of them said a single word. Eventually, a Kelthari attendant appeared at my shoulder and told me, in a polite and completely businesslike tone, that the general's body would need to be removed from the hall so that the feast could continue. I looked up at him. I looked around the room at the faces watching me, some horrified, some carefully blank, some already calculating, and I understood something in that moment with perfect clarity. They were waiting to see what I would do. Not because I mattered. I was an aide, a document carrier, third from the left, slightly back from the primary tier, always respectful humanity. That was me. That had always been us. They were waiting because they had spent 2,000 years watching humans respond to moments like this with apologies and patience and diplomatic language, and they wanted to know if this moment was different. I stood up slowly. I straightened my uniform. I looked at the Kelthari attendant. "Tell the king," I said, in standard Union dialect without raising my voice, "that humanity thanks him for his clarity." Then I walked out of the hall. Behind me I heard the feast resume, cutlery on plates, quiet conversation, the clink of glasses. I walked to the human embassy ship, and I pulled out my access card, and I opened the files that Mara Voss had left me. The files that only opened on her authorization or, in the event of her death, on mine. I had no idea what the protocols were. I was about to find out. And somewhere in the back of my mind, beneath the grief and the shock and the cold that had settled in my chest like a stone, there was a small and very quiet thought beginning to form. She had known. She had known this was coming. And she had spent 30 years getting ready. 2 hours after General Voss was taken from the Grand Conclave Hall, I was sitting alone in the command room of the human embassy vessel when her files finished decrypting. I want to be clear about what that room looked like because it matters. It was small, 12 feet across, gray walls, 2 chairs, a fold-out table with a screen built into its surface, a single porthole that showed the dark curve of the planet below and the lights of 40 other embassy ships docked along the station's outer ring. It was not a war room. It was not a command center. It was the kind of room where a junior diplomat caught up on correspondence. That was the room where I opened the Voss protocols and understood, for the first time, exactly what kind of woman Mara Voss had been. The files were enormous. Not in the dramatic sense. There were no dramatic headers, no bold declarations of intent. They were enormous in the way that 30 years of careful, methodical patient work is enormous, organized into sections, cross-referenced, updated as recently as 6 weeks ago, which meant she had been updating them while also preparing her conclave address, which meant she had genuinely known, that this moment was a real possibility. The first section was titled simply, "The Situation." I read it in one sitting. Humanity had arrived in Union space 2,000 years ago by accident. Our first generation of deep-range ships had overshot their calculated boundary by 11 light-years and dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly into a Kelthari patrol corridor. We were 9 ships, poorly armed, operating on technology that the Union considered primitive. The Kelthari fleet that surrounded us had enough firepower to remove us from existence in under a minute. What saved us was a man named Aldrich Kane. He was a navigation officer, not even the captain of his ship, but he was the one who opened a channel to the Kelthari fleet, and he was the one who said, in a message that took 3 days to translate and another 2 weeks to receive a response to, "We do not want to fight. We want to learn. Tell us the rules and we will follow them." The Kelthari found this amusing. They allowed it. They brought the 9 ships to a neutral station, and over the following decade, Kane negotiated what became known as the Covenant of 12 Sons. Humanity would enter the Union as a provisional member. We would contribute resources. We would follow Union law. We would not expand without council approval. We would accept the lowest membership tier and hold it until, as the covenant read in its original language, the humans demonstrate the qualities of a full partner. Nobody defined what those qualities were. The council never voted on criteria. 2,000 years passed, and humanity built and grew and contributed and asked, politely, every century, whether the tier might be reviewed. And every century the inner council, led by the Kelthari, said, "Not yet." Mara Voss had spent her entire career understanding why. The second section was titled, "What They Think They Know About Us." This was where I began to understand why she had needed 30 years. The Union did not fear humanity. That was the core of the problem. Every other species that had entered the Union at a low tier had eventually risen through either military threat, economic leverage, or the backing of a more powerful patron. Humanity had done none of these things. We had been patient. We had been cooperative. We had been, by every observable measure, exactly what Aldrich Kane had promised we would be, people who followed the rules. The Union had read this as confirmation of what they suspected from the start, that humans were, as a species, fundamentally limited, that our patience was not a strategy, it was our nature, that we were cooperative because we were not capable of being anything else. Vareth III had believed this more completely than anyone. His public statements on humanity, available in the file, meticulously catalogued, were not hateful. They were dismissive. He spoke of humans the way a farmer speaks of a reliable but unremarkable tool. Useful, predictable, not something you consulted, not something that needed a voice at the table. The third section was titled, "What They Do Not Know." I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. "I do not know how," I read. What the Union did not know was this. Humanity had not been patient because we were incapable of anything else. We had been patient because, from the very beginning, Aldrich Kane and the people who followed him had understood something fundamental about the situation. We were new. We were outnumbered. We had arrived without invitation. A direct confrontation at any point in the past 2,000 years would have been catastrophic, not because we would have lost immediately, though we might have, but because we would have confirmed every assumption they had already made, that we were dangerous, that we needed to be controlled, that the leash needed to be shortened. So instead, humanity had done something that required extraordinary discipline across 2,000 years and approximately 60 generations of people. They had made themselves indispensable without ever appearing to do so. I read the numbers. 31% of all cargo transit within the inner Union systems moved through human-flagged ships, not because humanity had pushed for this, because human ships were reliable, on time, and cheaper to operate than most alternatives. Over 400 years, without any single dramatic moment, human logistics had quietly become the circulatory system of Union commerce. 6 of the 9 active warp gates, the fixed transit points that made fast travel between star systems possible, required continuous maintenance. The technology for this maintenance had, over the centuries, drifted toward a specialization that humans had become better at than almost anyone else. Not because we had planned it that way, not at first, but because we had shown up, learned the work, and stayed. And when Voss had recognized what was happening, about 60 years ago, she had quietly encouraged that specialization, had made sure human engineers were first in line for every maintenance contract, had made sure they were well-trained, well-paid, and deeply embedded in systems that nobody paid much attention to because they always worked. The Union Medical Database was the third item. Human medical research had, in the past 2 centuries, produced 17 treatments for conditions that affected non-human species. One of these, a neural degeneration disease called the pale collapse, which affected 4 species including the Kelthari, had no other treatment anywhere in the known galaxy. Human doctors and human pharmaceutical manufacturers were the only source. The pale collapse affected roughly 8% of the Kelthari population at some point in their lives. Vayreth, the third's eldest child, had survived it because of human medicine. He had never publicly acknowledged this. The 4th section of the Voss Protocols was titled, The Relationships. This was the one that surprised me most, because I had thought of General Voss as a diplomat, brilliant, careful, formal. What I found in this section was something different, something warmer and stranger and more long-term than anything I had expected. Mara Voss had spent 30 years building personal relationships with individual members of dozens of species, not political relationships, not strategic alliances, genuine connections maintained through correspondence, through visits, through small and consistent acts of attention over years and decades. She knew the names of their children. She had attended funerals. She had sent gifts at the right times and withheld opinions when discretion was needed. The file contained a list of 43 individuals, each with a full relationship history and a brief note in Voss's own handwriting about what they cared about, what they feared, and whether, if the moment came, they could be trusted to act on principle. 43 individuals, across 19 species. And at the bottom of the list, in slightly different handwriting, as though added later, Callum will know what to do with this. I stared at my name for a long time. I had been her aide for 2 years. I thought I had been carrying her documents and making sure she stayed hydrated. I had not understood that she had also been teaching me. Every conversation she had let me sit in on, every subtle exchange she had walked me through afterward. Every time she had said, "Pay attention to what the Dravathi ambassador does with his hands when he's uncertain," or the Veth delegate speaks in short sentences when she agrees and long ones when she is building toward a refusal, she had not been making conversation. She had been giving me a map. She had known something might happen to her. She had made sure that if it did, the work would not die with her. The communication channel chimed. It was Earth Command calling for a situation report. I already knew what they expected me to say. They expected me to report the incident, express grief, and begin the process of drafting an apology, because that was what had always happened. That was the arrangement. Humanity made noise, and then humanity apologized, and then the arrangement continued. I let the channel ring twice more. Then I picked it up. "This is Callum Gray, acting senior human representative," I said. "I have General Voss's protocols. I am implementing them beginning immediately. I need secure uplinks to the 43 contacts on List 7, and I need them in the next 4 hours." There was a pause on the other end. The officer on duty sounded genuinely confused. "Mr. Gray, the Council is expecting a formal statement of." "The Council is going to receive one," I said, "just not the one they're expecting." I ended the call. Outside the porthole, the lights of 40 embassy ships floated quietly against the dark. Somewhere out there, in the Grand Conclave Hall, Vayreth III was finishing his feast. I opened the first contact on the list. Her name was Senna of the Dravathi Merchant Council, according to the file. She had known Mara Voss for 22 years. According to the file, she had sent a private message to Voss 4 months ago saying that if the Kelthari ever crossed a certain line, the Dravathi would not stand quietly. I needed to find out if she had meant it. I pressed connect, and the screen filled with the image of a small, dark-eyed creature in a copper robe, sitting very still, who looked at me for one long moment and then said, in careful standard dialect, "We heard what happened. We have been waiting for someone to call." I exhaled once, steady. "Then let's talk," I said. I spoke to 11 of the 43 contacts that night. I did not sleep. I do not think I was capable of it. The grief was there, it was underneath everything, a low and constant weight, but there was no room for it yet. Mara Voss had left me a very specific job to do, and I intended to do it. By the time the station's artificial dawn cycle brightened the corridor lights outside my door, I had confirmed 9 active commitments, 2 warm maybes, and 1 response so enthusiastic that I had to ask the contact to slow down. The Dravathi Merchant Council was already drafting their formal position statement. The Aelith Federation, a small but widely respected group of systems in the Outer Ring, had asked for a copy of the full economic data by morning. An elderly Veth observer named Orthan, who had known Voss since before I was born, had simply listened to me speak for 20 minutes without interrupting and then said, very quietly, "She prepared you well." Then the channel had gone dark. I took that as a positive sign. What I had not done was send any message to the Galactic King's office. I had not responded to the Kelthari diplomatic secretary's overnight communication, which had contained a brief and businesslike summary of the previous evening's events, characterized Veyrath's action as a corrective measure within the king's ceremonial authority, and requested that humanity submit any formal grievances through the standard Tier 4 complaint process. Tier 4 was the process used for things like cargo disputes and border marker disagreements. The response time was typically between 8 and 14 months. I saved the message without replying. The full Union Council session was scheduled for noon. It had been called by Veyrath's office, supposedly to address the disruption of the previous evening's conclave and restore normal proceedings. Translation: the king wanted to stand in front of 200 representatives and make the official version of events the only version. He wanted to control the narrative before anyone else could. I had spent the morning making sure he would not be able to do that. At 11 in the morning, the 43 contacts received a document. Not a short document, a long one. It was the condensed version of the Voss protocols, the economic data, the transit dependency maps, the medical supply chain analysis, the maintenance contracts for the warp gates. Clear, factual, sourced. Written in 6 languages simultaneously, which Voss had prepared years in advance, because she had known that when this document finally went out, speed would matter more than anything. At 11:40, Senna of the Dravathi Merchant Council sent a message to the full Union Assembly. She did not ask for permission. She simply sent it. It said, in the direct and efficient language the Dravathi used for serious matters, that the Dravathi Trading Consortium was formally requesting a tribunal review of the previous evening's events under Article 9 of the Conclave Charter, the article that governed the conduct of council members toward fellow Union representatives, and that pending the outcome of that review, Dravathi commercial vessels would be suspending non-essential trade with Kelthari-flagged ports. Not a declaration of anything dramatic, not a threat, just a clean, legal, procedurally correct action taken by a sovereign member of the Union under rules that Veyrath himself had signed. At 11:52, the Aelith Federation released a 2-paragraph statement expressing concern for the integrity of the conclave process and requesting that the noon session be delayed until the council could confirm all members felt safe to attend. At 11:58, 2 more species released similar statements. I sat in the back row of the council chamber as Veyrath III arrived and took his seat. He looked exactly as he had the previous evening, composed, unhurried, already slightly bored. His attendants arranged themselves. His advisors leaned in and spoke quietly in his ear. I watched his face as they spoke. I watched the moment he understood that the session he had called to control, the situation was not going to go the way he had planned. It was a small change, a very slight stiffening around the jaw, nothing that most observers would notice. I noticed because I had spent 2 years studying the faces of people who were recalculating their position. I stood before the council when my turn came. Human delegations did not usually make unilateral addresses. It was not protocol. The presiding officer, a senior diplomat from the Tavith Collective, a round and careful individual who had managed proceedings at 3 previous conclaves, gave me a long look that communicated, without words, that she was aware I was about to do something unusual and was choosing not to stop me. I appreciated that. I did not prepare the room with history. I did not explain the situation in emotional terms. I did not talk about grief or outrage or what it had felt like to hold General Voss while she died. I talked about numbers. I spoke for 18 minutes. I put the transit dependency maps on the main display. I put the Warpgate maintenance contracts beside them. I showed the medical supply data, with particular attention to the pale collapse treatment figures. I presented everything in the same calm, factual tone that Mara Voss had used in this room 4 years ago when she had addressed the council about border expansion, the same tone that the council had listened to politely and then ignored. This time, no one ignored it. I could feel the room changing as I spoke. Not dramatically, there were no gasps, no dramatic reactions. But I had learned from 2 years beside Voss that the most important shifts in rooms like this were quiet ones. The way an ambassador leaned forward slightly. The way a delegation head stopped making notes and started watching. The way the quality of attention in a room changed when people stopped waiting for a speaker to finish and started actually listening. When I finished, I said one thing that was not on any chart. General Mara Voss spent her career ensuring that humanity and the Union could grow together in a way that made both stronger. She believed, and I believe, that this is still possible. What happened last night does not have to define what comes next, but what comes next will be defined by how this council chooses to respond to it. We are watching, and so is every member of this Union. I sat down. Veyrath's lead advisor immediately requested the floor and delivered a sharp, well-prepared argument about sovereignty, ceremonial authority, and the proper channels for Tier 4 grievances. It was a competent performance. 3 hours into the session, Senna of the Drevathi asked the floor for a procedural motion. The motion passed 17-6. An honor tribunal would be convened within 30 days to examine the events of the previous evening under Article 9. The noon session was adjourned. I walked back to the human embassy ship. The communications channel was full: Earth government, colony station administrators, Union press services, 3 separate requests for comment from non-human news outlets. I ignored all of them. I sat down at the fold-out table and opened the next section of the protocols. And then something happened that was not in any file. The communication channel opened on a frequency I did not recognize. The caller identification showed a symbol I had never seen, but which I had read about: the mark of the Veth Observer Council, the oldest diplomatic body in the galaxy, older than the Union itself, older than the Conclave Charter. They had not communicated directly with a human in recorded history. They observed. They noted. They occasionally issued long-form historical assessments that other species debated for generations. The screen filled with an image. The figure was small, very old. Her species was a type I could not immediately place: pale still, with large dark eyes and a quality of absolute calm that felt less like peace and more like deep patience. She was sitting in a room that appeared to contain no furniture at all except the chair she occupied. She looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "We have been watching your species for 2,000 years, Callum Gray. We have watched many species. Some we watched rise, some we watched end. We are, at this point, interested in what you intend to do." I looked at her. "I intend," I said, "to do what General Voss spent 30 years preparing for." The Veth observer was quiet for a moment. "We are aware of what she prepared," she said. "What we are asking is whether you understand what she ultimately wanted." I had read every file. I had memorized the protocols. I knew the economic leverage, the alliance contacts, the procedural pathways, but the observer was not asking me about any of those things. I thought about Mara Voss's face as she died. I thought about the way her fingers had tightened on my arm before she went. I thought about the 2 words she had spent her last breath on, and I thought about the fact that she had not said fight or win or make them pay. She had said, "The protocols." She wanted, I said slowly, for humanity to finally be known, not feared, not pitied, not dismissed, known for the galaxy to see what we actually are. The Veth observer regarded me for another long moment. "That," she said, "is the correct answer. We will be watching, Mr. Gray." The channel closed. I sat in the quiet room and thought about all the things that were moving now. The Dravathi trade suspension, the Aleph statement, the tribunal process, the 11 contacts I had not yet reached, the 6 Warpgate maintenance contracts that were due for renewal in 90 days. I thought about Vareth III, who was at this moment, I was certain, instructing his advisors to prepare a response that would put humanity back in its place. I thought about what it meant that the Veth were watching. And I thought about what Mara Voss had written at the bottom of page 1 of the protocols, in her own handwriting, in a sentence she had apparently decided didn't need to be part of any formal section. "The galaxy doesn't fear what it understands. Make them understand us." I opened the next set of contacts. The work was not finished. It had barely started. But for the first time since the night before, the cold stone in my chest had shifted slightly, and what was underneath it was not panic and not rage. It was something quieter and more durable than either. It was purpose. Vareth III made his first serious mistake on the 4th day. I suppose, thinking about it now, I should not have been surprised. He had spent 300 years making decisions without consequence. His empire was old and powerful, and had never, in his lifetime, faced a threat that could not be resolved through straightforward application of force. The idea that something was unfolding that could not be stopped by a show of military authority, it was simply outside his experience. The mistake he made was this. He mobilized the 3rd Kelthari battle fleet and positioned it along the 3 main transit corridors that connected the human colony worlds on the Meridian arc to the inner Union systems. Not an attack, a demonstration. The Kelthari called it a security positioning for transit stability, which was diplomatic language for, "Look at what we can do." They expected it to work the way it always worked. The threatened party would look at the ships, perform the relevant calculations, and stand down. I received notification of the fleet movement at 6 in the morning. I read it twice. Then I opened a secure channel and sent exactly 4 words to the Union's open communications network, addressed to no specific recipient, visible to every monitoring system in the station. 3rd Kelthari battle fleet positioned. That was all. Nothing threatening, no demand, no response or countermove stated, just a factual observation broadcast on an open channel at 6 in the morning when every embassy monitoring team on the station would be logging it. Within 90 minutes, I received 8 incoming calls. 6 of them were from species whose commerce routes ran through those same transit corridors. The 7th was from Senna of the Dravathi. "The corridors they've blocked," she said without preamble, "handle 40% of our eastern shipping, not our problem normally. But since they've chosen now to do this, We have updated our formal position to the tribunal. We are requesting expedited review." "I appreciate that," I said. "Do you need anything else from us today?" "Not today," I said. "Thank you, Senna." The eighth call was from a man I had not expected to hear from. His name was Corporal Henry Watts, and he was the lead engineer on Warpgate 7, a mid-range transit node in the outer corridor, who had been quietly doing maintenance work for the Union for 11 years and had never once been involved in politics. "Mr. Gray," he said, "I've been following what's been happening. Me and the team here, we just want you to know that our maintenance contract renewal is coming up in 62 days, and we have decided as a team that we will not be signing the renewal until the tribunal has concluded." I looked at him through the screen. He was young. He had grease on his hands and tired eyes and the look of someone who had made a decision he knew was significant and was slightly terrified by it. "Corporal Watts," I said, "does your team understand that this decision may have personal consequences for—" "Yes, sir," he said. "We talked it over, all 14 of us. We understand. He paused, and something crossed his face that I recognized. The same thing I had felt sitting on the floor of the conclave hall. She shouldn't have died like that, and we've decided we're not going to act like it didn't happen." I did not trust my voice for a moment. "Pass along my gratitude to your team," I said, "all 14 of them." He nodded and ended the call. I sat with that for a while. Henry Watts and his 14-person maintenance crew at Warpgate 7 had not been in any protocol. They had not been on any contact list. They had not been briefed or positioned or prepared. They had simply watched what was happening, discussed it among themselves, and decided on their own, as ordinary people, that they were not willing to continue as if nothing had changed. This was the thing I was slowly understanding about the Voss protocols. The contacts, the economic data, the alliance framework, these were the structure. But the structure only worked because underneath it, across every human-flagged ship and colony station and maintenance crew and medical research team and logistics hub in the galaxy, there were people like Henry Watts. People who had spent their lives doing their jobs quietly, building trust one small interaction at a time, and who were now ready, without being asked, without being ordered, to stand for something. Mara Voss had not created this. She had simply recognized it, and she had built the protocols around it like scaffolding around a building that was already there. I sent a brief note to each of the 43 contacts. "The Warpgate 7 team has paused their renewal. Please be aware that similar decisions may be occurring across multiple sectors without coordination from this office." Within 12 hours, 3 more maintenance teams had made the same call. A human-run cargo logistics firm in the outer corridor announced a scheduled operational review that would pause 12 freight routes for an unspecified period. A medical supply coordinator, completely independently, placed a routine order review on a shipment of pale collapse treatment that had been scheduled for Kelthari distribution the following week. None of it was illegal. All of it was within normal operational authority. Every single decision had a completely legitimate procedural justification that had nothing to do with politics. And every single decision was, in practical terms, a stone quietly placed in the path of an empire that had never looked down while it was walking. Verath's response came on the 5th day. It came through the Union Council's formal channel, addressed to the human delegation, which meant me, since I was still the only one here. It was a long document, full of the specific kind of language that powerful people use when they are trying to explain why the rules do not apply to them. It cited the king's ceremonial authority. It referenced historical precedents for disciplinary action against protocol violators. It described humanity's current activities as destabilizing provocation, and demanded that all human commercial entities return to normal operations in the interest of Union stability. At the end, it contained a line that I read 3 times to make sure I had understood it correctly. It said, should human entities continue on the present course. The Kelthari Empire reserves the right to review the terms of the Covenant of 12 Sons. I set the document down. The Covenant of 12 Sons was the agreement that had made humanity part of the Union. If Varath voided it, humanity was technically no longer a Union member. We would lose the legal protections, the trade agreements, the formal status we had held for 2,000 years. It was the biggest threat he had. I picked up the document again. I read it once more, and I noticed carefully, in the way that Mara Voss had taught me to notice things, what was not in it. There was no military ultimatum. There was no deadline. There was no specific demand with a specific consequence attached. There was a vague threat about reviewing a covenant and a demand to return to normal operations that offered no definition of what normal meant. Varath was not certain. He was pressing a lever to see if it still worked. I wrote my response in under 3 minutes. I addressed it to the full Union Council, copied every ambassador on the station, and sent it before I had time to second-guess myself. It said, the human delegation has received the Kelthari communication. We note with interest the suggestion that the Covenant of 12 Sons may be reviewed. We would welcome that review under the conditions of Article 14, which requires the participation of all Union member species. We look forward to the Tribunal's findings and to a full and transparent accounting of the events of the conclave under Article 9. Humanity remains committed to a union built on equal partnership and consistent law. We are confident the same is true of our fellow members. I hit send. Then I called Orthan of the Veth Observer Council, because I needed to know if I had just done something very clever or very foolish. He listened to me read the response back to him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Article 14 requires unanimous consent to review the covenant. The Kelthari do not have unanimous consent. They have 4 loyal worlds. The threat was a demonstration of pressure, not a genuine legal move. I know, I said, but I wanted to make sure I hadn't missed something. You have not missed anything, he said. You have done something your general would have approved of. I spent the next 3 hours on calls with the corridor commerce associations. They were not political bodies. They were trade groups, species and entities whose primary concern was that goods moved efficiently and contracts were honored. They had no interest in galactic drama. What they did have was a very strong interest in the fact that 3 major transit corridors were currently blocked by a military fleet that had no legal authority to be there under the Union's own commerce charter. The Aelith Federation filed a formal commerce obstruction complaint that afternoon. It was the dry, bureaucratic, utterly unsexy kind of legal action that never appeared in history books, but which had an enforcement mechanism that Varath had apparently not looked at recently. Under the obstruction finding, if confirmed by the tribunal, which was now expedited, the responsible party was liable for daily compensation to every affected commercial entity for every day the obstruction continued. The 3rd Kelthari battle fleet was currently blocking 3 corridors. The daily liability figure was calculated overnight by 3 separate Union accounting bodies. When the number was circulated the following morning, Varath's finance minister contacted the tribunal requesting a clarification on whether the fleet's positioning technically qualified as an obstruction. The fleet was moved back to standard patrol distance within 48 hours. No announcement was made, no admission, the ship simply moved. I stood at the porthole in the command room and watched nothing change in the view outside, still the same dark sky and the same row of embassy ships. And I thought about a maintenance crew on Warpgate 7, and a merchant counselor in copper robes, and an elderly observer who had said I had not missed anything, and I thought about the work that remained. The tribunal had not yet concluded. Varath was still the Galactic King. 4 loyal worlds still stood with him. The Covenant was still in its current form, which meant humanity was still third from the left, slightly back from the primary tier. But something had changed. I could feel it in the calls I was receiving now, not just from the 43 contacts, but from people who had not been on any list, who were reaching out because they were watching and drawing their own conclusions. I thought about Orthan's words, "She prepared you well." I thought about what the Veth Observer had asked me, what she ultimately wanted. And I thought about the fact that Mara Voss had not written a protocol for revenge. She had not written a protocol for dominance. She had written a protocol for being known. The work was not finished. The hardest part, I suspected, was still ahead. But we were no longer walking quietly with our heads down. And the galaxy was beginning to notice. Orthan of the Veth Observer Council called me on the morning of the 14th day after the conclave. He called early. Station time showed just past 5 in the morning when the channel opened, and he did not begin with any of the careful courtesies that most species use to open formal communications. He simply appeared on the screen, very still, very old, and said, "Verath is going to move against the outer colony stations, not the fleet, something quieter. He is going to attempt to block the renewal of 3 human administrative contracts in the Inner Council Secretariat. If those contracts are not renewed, human representatives lose formal observer status on 4 standing committees." I was already wide awake. I had not been sleeping well. "When?" I asked. "The motion will be filed today at noon session. He has the votes, just barely, from his remaining allies." I thought quickly. The standing committee observer status was not dramatic, but it mattered. It was how human representatives got early notice of policy discussions, how we participated in the technical working groups that shaped union law before it ever reached a formal vote. Losing it would not end anything, but it would push humanity back quietly, and it would signal to the broader union that Verath could still make moves. "What does he think this accomplishes?" I asked. "He thinks it demonstrates that the situation is recoverable," Orthan said. "That he can absorb the tribunal challenge and the economic pressure and still control the small mechanisms of union administration. He needs to show his remaining allies that there is still value and loyalty." I nodded. I understood the logic. I even, in a cold way, respected it. He was not acting like a man who had already lost. He was acting like a man trying to maintain a position. "Is there any way to block the motion?" I asked. "There is one procedural path," Orthan said. "Article 31 of the Administrative Charter allows any standing member to call for a full council review of administrative contract renewals if a threshold of members request it. The threshold is 12. Currently 9 have expressed informal support." "Who are the other 3? I asked. Orthan gave me the names. I recognized 2 of them from Voss's contact files, people she had not listed as firm commitments, but as what she called long-term possibilities. The third was a name I did not recognize, a delegate from a species called the Semrith, who apparently rarely participated in inter-union politics but held legitimate membership status. "The Semrith delegate," I said. "What do you know about them?" "Her name is Lyra Palewing. She has been an observer delegate for 7 years. She has voted on 11 matters in that time, all procedural. She does not make commitments easily." He paused. "She was, however, at the conclave feast when General Voss died. She was seated 12 positions to the left. I am told she has not attended any of the subsequent social functions." I made a note. The 2 long-term possibilities in Voss's files both required direct contact. One was reachable immediately, a senior trade official from the Borathi systems, whom Voss had written about in characteristic detail. He values directness, dislikes flattery, makes decisions based on long-term stability rather than short-term alliance, and will not commit to anything he believes is going to fail. I called him. He answered on the first ring, which surprised me. "I expected you to call," he said. You want the Article 31 threshold. Yes, I said. I want to understand whether you are willing to be the 10th signature. And you want to know why I haven't already signed. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, because I need to know that this is not a moment, that you are not just responding to what happened and will return to the arrangement once the pressure passes. The Borathi have invested significantly in Union stability. If we act in support of humanity now and humanity does not follow through, if you accept a settlement, a quiet resolution, a return to third from the left, we will have made an enemy of the Kelthari for nothing. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in 2 weeks. I cannot promise you outcomes, I said. I can tell you what I understand General Voss to have intended. She did not spend 30 years preparing a response to one incident. She spent 30 years preparing for humanity to take a permanent and equal place in the Union. That process does not end with a tribunal. It does not end with a contract negotiation. She intended it to be the beginning of something different. I intend the same. Another pause. Article 31, he said. You will have the Borathi's signature by 10 o'clock. The second long-term possibility was harder to reach. Her name was Devara, a senior cultural attaché from the Three Moons Federation, and Voss's notes on her were detailed and careful. Deeply principled, not easily moved by political argument, acts on her own assessment of ethical clarity, has no personal relationship with me but is aware of our work, needs to believe she is acting from conviction and not being managed. I read those notes 3 times before I placed the call. She answered after a long delay. She looked tired, or at least the human equivalent of what I was learning to read as tiredness in her species. I know why you are calling, she said. Then I will be direct, I said. I am not going to make a political argument to you. You already know the argument. You know what happened at the conclave. I think you have already made your decision and you are looking for confirmation that you can trust what you're seeing. She looked at me carefully. What you're seeing, I said, is real. Humanity is not going to accept a quiet return to the arrangement. General Voss spent her entire life building toward a different outcome, and she died because someone decided she had no right to speak at the table. Her death is not going to be corrected by a polite settlement. We are asking for equal standing, not because we are angry, but because we have earned it and it is right. I believe you already know that. I believe that is why you haven't signed yet. Not because you are uncertain about the right thing, but because you are deciding how much it will cost you. Devara was quiet for a long time. The Article 31 signature, she said finally. It needs to be filed by 11. Yes. You will have it by 9. The Semrith delegate, Lyra Palewing, did not answer her communication channel. I tried 3 times over the course of the morning. Nothing. I found the Semrith embassy listed in the station directory and sent a formal written request for a meeting, marked urgent, delivered through the official courier system. At 11:30, 90 minutes before the noon session, I received a single-line written response. I will meet you at the South Observation Bay in 15 minutes. I walked there quickly. She was already there when I arrived. Smaller than I had expected, fine-boned, still, wearing a gray traveling coat that seemed too plain for a delegate of her tenure. She was standing at the wide window that overlooked the station exterior, looking out at the stars. She did not turn when I entered. I watched her die, Lyra Palewing said. I was 12 seats away and I watched her die and I did not stand up. I did not say anything. I sat at that table and I looked at my plate and I did not move. I stood beside her at the window. Nobody moved, I said quietly. I have been thinking about that for 14 days, she said. What kind of person sits at a table and does nothing? Everyone at that table sat and did nothing, I said, including me for the first 30 seconds. She finally turned to look at me. I am not a political person, she said. The Semrith do not involve ourselves in inner union matters. We have been content to observe from a distance for 200 years. I understand, I said. I do not want to sign a document because I feel guilty, she said. I want to sign it because it is right. And I need to hear it from you that what you are doing is genuinely aimed at something better, not at revenge, not at power, something better. I thought about what the Veth observer had asked me, what she ultimately wanted. I thought about what Myra Voss had writ on the first page of the protocols. General Voss wanted the galaxy to know us, I said, not to fear us, not to be dominated by us, to understand what humanity is and what we are capable of, and to have the standing in this union that matches that reality. That is what I am working toward. Everything else, the tribunal, the economics, the contracts, is in service of that. If we achieve full and equal membership, and humanity uses it to become another Kelthari empire, then we have failed her. That is not what this is. Lyra Palewing looked at me for a long time. The Semrith, she said, have been waiting for someone to say that for a long time. She pulled out a small signing card, a formal piece of union documentation, already filled in, and handed it to me. The Semrith signature was already on it. I filled it out this morning, she said. I was waiting to hear you say what you just said. The noon session was delayed by 45 minutes while the Article 31 petition was processed. When it was finally presented, the count stood at 12 confirmed signatures. Veyrath's motion to block the contract renewals was subject to full council review, which pushed it back 6 weeks. Veyrath's lead advisor stood at the podium for a long time after the count was read. I watched him from the back row. I watched him process the arithmetic. 4 loyal worlds, 12 signatures on the opposing side, a tribunal still in progress, economic disruption spreading through corridors his fleet could no longer legally block. He said the right words: procedural objection, request for adjournment, reservation of rights under the covenant, and he said them competently. But I had been in enough rooms with Voss to know the difference between a position of strength and a position of management. Veyrath was managing. He was no longer trying to win. He was trying to limit what he lost. After the session, Orthan requested a private call. He did not look pleased exactly. The Veth did not display pleasure in ways I could easily read, but there was something in his voice that felt like measured approval. The Dravathi formal petition to the tribunal was strengthened overnight, he said. They have added 17 signatories. The tribunal is now expected to conclude in 12 days rather than 30. And the findings? I asked. The findings will state what the evidence states, he said. What happens after the findings is a separate question. I know, I said. I have been thinking about that. And what have you concluded? That the findings are not the end. That what we do with them will matter as much as what they say. That there is a choice coming, a significant one, and I need to make sure I get it right. Orthan looked at me for a moment. Your general used to say something, he said. She said it to me once many years ago when she was much younger than she was when she died. She said, the hardest victory is the one you have to be generous about. I did not say anything. She was a remarkable person, Orthan said. Yes, I said, she was. The call ended. I sat in the quiet room with the fold-out table and the gray walls and the porthole looking out at the dark, and I thought about the hardest victory. I thought about what it would mean to get the tribunal findings, to have the support of 12 signatures and more, to have the moral clarity of the moment and the economic leverage and the legal framework, and then to make the choice that Mara Voss had built her entire life around but never lived to make. I thought about what it meant to be generous in a moment like that. I thought I was beginning to understand. The work was not finished, but I knew now exactly what the finish line looked like. The tribunal findings were delivered on a Wednesday. I had not slept the night before. Not because I was afraid of what the findings would say. The evidence was clear, and Orthan had indicated a week ago that the outcome was not in question, but because I kept thinking about what came after. The weight of it had been building for days, and I had learned during the weeks since the conclave that the nights were when it became most real. During the days, there were calls to make and documents to read and decisions to take. During the nights, there was only the quiet room and the porthole and everything that had not been finished. I thought about Mara Voss a great deal during those nights. The tribunal convened at 9 in the morning, in the formal chamber on the station's upper ring. The chamber was round, with seating for all Union member delegations arranged in concentric circles, and a raised central floor where the presiding tribunal panel sat. It was the oldest room on the station. The floor was original. 2,000 years of diplomacy had been conducted on that stone. The findings were read by the panel's senior arbiter, an ancient Dorvathi who had served on 3 previous tribunals, and whose voice, even amplified, was barely louder than ordinary conversation. He read for 22 minutes. The findings were thorough. They covered the conclave charter's provisions on conduct, the specific Article 9 prohibitions, the ceremonial context of the blade, and what that context meant under Union law. They cited 17 precedents. They concluded, in clear and measured language, that Vereth III, Galactic King of the Kelthari Empire, had committed a violation of the conclave charter of a severity that had not been recorded in Union history. They recommended formal censure, removal from the conclave chairmanship, and in a passage that seemed to land differently on every delegation present, a full review of the Kelthari Empire's governance structure as it pertained to Union obligations. It was not a verdict of destruction. It was not an order to dissolve an empire. It was the careful, deliberate language of a body that understood that what it said today would be studied for centuries. Vereth received the findings without visible reaction. He sat in his seat in the outer ring, attended by his advisors, and he looked straight ahead. I was watching him, as I had been watching him for weeks, and what I saw was not a man who had broken. It was a man who was very still in the way that very old things become still when they are waiting. When the chamber was opened for formal responses, his representative stood and delivered a prepared statement. It was 14 minutes long. It did not apologize. It cited historical authority and sovereign governance rights and the complexity of ceremonial tradition. It was, technically, not a defense so much as a context. It was the statement of a man who was not admitting wrongdoing, but understood he no longer had the political weight to refuse the process entirely. I was the next speaker. I had written and rewritten my response 17 times in the preceding days. I had shown it to Orthan, who had read it twice without commenting and then said, "This is correct." I had read it to the Borathi trade official and to Senna of the Dravathi and to Lyra Palewing separately, because I wanted to hear how it landed with people I had come to trust. They had all said versions of the same thing, that it was not what they expected, and that it was right. I stepped onto the central floor. I looked around the room. 200 faces, 47 species, every shape of mind and life and history that the known galaxy contained, all in the same round room on the oldest stone floor in the Union. I thought about the 9 ships that had dropped out of faster-than-light travel 2,000 years ago and been surrounded by Kelthari weapons, and I thought about Aldrich Kane opening a channel and saying, "We do not want to fight. We want to learn. Tell us the rules and we will follow them." I spoke. "The human delegation accepts the tribunal's findings," I said. "We accept them fully, without reservation, and we are grateful for the care and thoroughness with which this panel has done its work." I paused. "Humanity does not come to this moment with anger," I said. "I want to be precise about that because I think it matters. We come with grief. General Mara Voss was a person of exceptional quality, not just as a diplomat or an officer, but as a human being. She believed in this union. She believed that every species in this chamber was capable of more than it had yet shown. She spent her entire life in service of that belief. She deserved better than what happened to her. The chamber was very quiet. We also come with a specific request, not a demand, a request. We are asking this council to consider the full human membership petition, the petition that General Voss was in the process of presenting when she was interrupted under the conditions of the Covenant Renewal Clause. We are asking to be treated as what we are, a full partner. I look toward Verath's delegation. We are not asking for the Kelthari Empire to be destroyed. We are not asking for punitive measures that would destabilize 11 star systems and cause suffering to millions of people who had no part in what happened at this conclave. We are asking for accountability, for the specific individual responsible, and for a change, a permanent, structural change, in how humanity is regarded in this union. There was a sound in the room, not a gasp, not applause, something between, a kind of collective exhale. We believe, I said, that an honest accounting of what has happened here and what it reveals about how the covenant has been applied over 2,000 years is an opportunity, not for punishment, for correction. The galaxy is better when its members are treated as equals. We have been waiting for 2,000 years to say that clearly. We are saying it now. I stepped back. Orthan would later tell me that the chamber remained completely silent for 40 seconds after I returned to my seat. What followed was 6 hours of formal proceedings that I will not describe in full, because the procedural details of Union Council deliberations are, genuinely, not interesting to anyone who was not there for professional reasons. What matters is what happened, and what happened was this. At 4 in the afternoon, the presiding arbiter called for a formal vote on the human full membership petition under Covenant Renewal Clause 17. The required threshold for passage was 2/3 of member species. The count reached 2/3 at species 31 of 47. It passed at 41. 4 species, all Kelthari allies, voted against. 2 abstained. 41 voted in favor. Humanity was, by a vote of 41 to 4, admitted to full and equal membership in the Galactic Union, with a permanent seat on the Inner Council and full voting rights on all standing committees. The session log noted that the vote was witnessed by observers from all member species, including the Veth Observer Council, whose participation in an active Union vote was recorded for the first time in their history. I did not make a speech after the vote. I did not need to. What I did, after the chamber was adjourned and the delegations began to disperse, was walk back to the central floor. The room was emptying. Voices echoed in the high ceiling. The oldest stone floor in the Union was cold and gray and worn smooth by 2,000 years of feet. I stood there for a moment, alone. I reached into my coat pocket and took out the Solith Star, Mara Voss's Solith Star, which I had taken from around her neck in the conclave hall on the night she died, and had been carrying ever since. It was small, a 5-pointed thing in pale metal, with the Union crest on one side and a date on the other. She had been awarded it 11 years ago for work in the Outer Corridor conflict resolution, the details of which were classified in a file I had read 3 times in the past month. I set it on the floor of the chamber. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the vote had not already said. I walked back to the human embassy ship for what I knew would be the last time in this role. Earth's government had sent a full diplomatic team. They were already en route, would arrive in 3 days, would take over the formal establishment of the new council seat with proper ceremony and staff and the weight of institutional acknowledgement. That was right and appropriate. The work I had done was the work of an emergency. It was not the work of a permanent representative. I had a message waiting from Henry Watts at Warpgate 7. It contained no text, just a small image. 14 people standing in front of a maintenance panel on a space station, looking at the camera with the slightly exhausted expressions of people who have been working very hard for several weeks and are not sure yet how to feel about what has just happened. I looked at that image for a long time. I thought about Senna's copper robe and Devara's tired face and Lyra Palewing handing me a document she had already filled out. I thought about the Borathi trade official who needed to know we would follow through. I thought about Orthan saying, "She prepared you well." I thought about the Veth observer who had told me the correct answer. I thought about Aldrich Kane, 2,000 years ago, opening a channel to a fleet that could have ended everything and saying, "We do not want to fight, we want to learn." I thought about a woman who had known, with the calm certainty of someone who had spent 30 years preparing for a single moment, that this day was possible, who had spent her entire career making sure that when it came, the people left behind would be ready. She had not written protocols for revenge. She had written protocols for recognition. She had trusted that the people who came after her would understand the difference. She had trusted me to understand the difference, even though I was 29 years old and had been carrying her documents for 2 years and had no idea until the night she died what I was actually holding. The galaxy had asked humanity 2,000 years ago, "Tell us who you are." And Aldrich Kane had said, "We do not want to fight." And Mara Voss had spent a lifetime saying, in every way she could, "We are more than you think." And what the vote today had said 41-4, on the oldest stone floor in the Union was, finally, "We see you." I had one more thing to do before the embassy team arrived. I opened a fresh communication channel, not a diplomatic line, not a secure uplink, just the ordinary open wave frequency that any Union citizen could access, and I recorded a message. I did not address it to anyone in particular. I did not claim it was official. It was not long. I said, "My name is Callum Gray. 3 weeks ago I was a junior aide. I carried documents and made sure important people ate something when they forgot to. Tonight, because of the work of a woman named Mara Voss, work she did over 30 years, work she trusted to ordinary people who did their jobs and stood for something when it mattered, humanity has a full seat at the table of the Galactic Union. This was not won by a hero. It was built by a generation and the one before it and the one before that. Aldrich Kane opened a channel 2,000 years ago and said, "We do not want to fight." General Voss spent her life saying, "We deserve to be known." Both of them were right. This is what 2,000 years of patience actually looks like. It looks like 41 votes on a Wednesday morning. It looks like a maintenance crew on Warpgate 7 who decided to stand for something because a woman they never met died in a way she should not have. It looks like a lot of people doing small things consistently, and one person putting together a very large document, and one very long night, and eventually the galaxy understanding something it should have understood a long time ago. I paused. General Voss used to say, "The galaxy doesn't fear what it understands. Make them understand us." I looked at the record light on the channel. "I think we did, General. I think we passed." I closed the channel. Outside the porthole, the stars were exactly where they always were. The station lights reflected quietly off the hulls of 40 embassy ships. Somewhere out there, in 11 Kelthari systems, a new governing council was beginning its first week. Somewhere, Lyra Palewing of the Semrith was writing a report she had not expected to write this year. Somewhere, Henry Watts and his team were signing a maintenance contract renewal and then going to sleep because they had been awake for a very long time. Somewhere in the chamber at the top of the station, a small pale star was sitting on the oldest stone floor in the Union. The galaxy did not feel different. The stars did not rearrange themselves. Nothing dramatic happened to mark the moment. 2,000 years of patience had ended not with a battle, not with a declaration, not with fire or fear or force, but with a vote and a question finally answered, and a seat at a table where humanity had always belonged. I turned off the light in the command room. and for the first time in 3 weeks, I slept.